It doesn't matter if you invest in stocks, trading cards, memorabilia, some other type of collectible. There's always going to be a time to buy, and there's always going to be a time to sell. And the same thing holds true for fantasy football. Because with the NFL draft just a few short weeks away, I've got a few players that we need to decide on right now whether we should buy or sell, because these guys have the most to lose. After the majority of free agency wrapped up, these four players definitely found themselves in a much better position than what they were at one point in time. Maybe we saw one of the players leave their team. Maybe we saw someone traded. Maybe their team didn't really invest in somebody that was going to take a lot of playing time from them. But next up is the NFL draft, and the NFL draft does a really good job of ruining some players for us. So I've got a few guys that we're going to chat about, and we have to figure out whether it's time to buy or it's time to sell, because after the NFL draft is all said and done, these guys may end up having more to lose than a lot of other players. Let's start out in LA with the Los Angeles Chargers, and after getting rid of Keenan Allen and Mike Williams, Josh Palmer is ready to take the next step in this offense. One huge difference between the Los Angeles Chargers this year and maybe of years of the past is what they're going to do on the ground pounding the football. Jim Harbaugh wants to win up front with his offensive line, and he wants to be able to establish the run and then let the offense and the passing game play off of that. And when you do that, you have an opportunity to open up a vertical threat, which is exactly what Josh Palmer is. Because even though Palmer missed some time last season on targets of 20 or more yards down the field, he finished pretty high in a couple of key categories. He finished 7th among wide receivers with 42.7 yards per reception. And he finished 9th among wide receivers with 21.36 yards per route run. So we already know on those targets 20 or more yards down the field, Josh Palmer can absolutely play big. And really the only person you're fighting with for targets right now is going to be Quentin Johnston. And the big key here is, what do the Los Angeles Chargers do at number 5 overall? I personally think there's a good chance they trade out of that pick, but there is going to be an opportunity for them to take one of the top 3 wide receivers or the top tight end, Brock Bowers, when the pick comes to them at number 5. Now, Brock Bowers is not going to hurt Joshua Palmer as much as some of the other wide receivers would, because Malik Neighbors, Marvin Harrison Jr., Rome Odunze, all of those guys would definitely be somebody to take away significant targets from Josh Palmer. But we know Justin Herbert and Joshua Palmer have a pretty good connection. We have seen it over the last couple of years when Palmer has had to step in and be a more reliable target for him. So personally, I still think Palmer could have a really good 2024 season, but he might lose some of that consistency if one of these guys ends up being drafted. And if they are, his top 24 ceiling could become more of just a flex option. Let's head on out to Buffalo and talk about one of my breakout candidates from last year, James Cook. And James Cook had a pretty decent season. Maybe we didn't get the ceiling we would have liked from him last year, but he still played pretty well, especially down the stretch. Now, Buffalo really didn't do anything in free agency, and maybe they still do after the draft, but it's going to be somebody that they consider to be really a last resort. And with the amount of running backs that were available this year, the thought was that maybe Buffalo could add a backup to help spell James Cook a little bit. And there were some good backups out there that could have caused some problems for James Cook's value and upside. But instead, he's got Ty Johnson and Darrington Evans behind him. No offense to either of those guys, but you're not anywhere close to James Cook. So the question becomes, do the Bills add a running back in the draft? Absolutely, I think they add some depth, especially some younger depth to that running back room. But when do they add that depth? And not only that, who is it going to be? Is it going to be a guy that's going to be more of a backup that's going to help James Cook maybe on short yardage situations, or maybe kind of what Tank Bigsby was to Travis Etienne last year, just a guy that's going to help spell him? Or do they add somebody that they feel like could become a true all-around back and potentially steal James Cook's job? Now, one thing I want to remind everybody of is that depending on when a running back is drafted, they typically really aren't going to make that big of an impact. Guys that are taken after day 2 very, very rarely become fantasy relevant. So we are looking at the first 2 days of the NFL draft for Buffalo. If we don't see a running back come off the board at that point, James Cook should be solid. And like I mentioned at the beginning with James Cook, he did lack some upside last year, like his breakaway percentage, his huge runs, things of that nature. Big plays just lacked last season for James Cook. But his 33 runs of 10 or more yards was second among all NFL running backs. So he was still doing a good job with a decent floor. But that's going to be the biggest scenario here and why James Cook could be one of my biggest losers. Because we could go from having a guy that has top 12 potential to a guy that realistically we say, hey, he's an RB2 or a flex option because someone else is there to take the job. All right, I know a lot of people are invested in George Pickens, and I get that. I like George Pickens. He was a breakout candidate for me last year. I am being just a little bit cautious because I want to see what the Steelers have in mind for the rest of the offseason, and I don't know how much I trust Arthur Smith, but I talked about Pickens a lot last year. And when I included information on him being a breakout, I talked about it in our draft guide, and this is just a reminder that you should be pre-ordering your 2024 Fantasy Headliners draft guide right now. This thing is chock full of so much information that if you don't get started sooner rather than later, you'll probably not even make your way through the entire thing. And we keep getting the same feedback year after year. For the price point, this is one of, if not the best fantasy football materials in all of the industry. And not only that, but people win ships quite a bit with it. And while I can't give you all the information right now, there may be something super special about this year's draft guide that's going to be announced very soon. So head on over to thefantasyheadliners.com and get yours pre-ordered right now. Okay, now even though I have some concerns about George Pickens still, and I'm waiting to see what happens, there's still some really good things about him as well, and Deontay Johnson being gone is probably the best of those. And really the only other competition that he has on the team right now for targets has to be Pat Freiermuth. Outside of that, there's not really anybody that's going to command the type of target share that Pickens would deserve. I mean, they've got Van Jefferson, they've got Quez Watkins, and really they have a bunch of guys that even if you had on your Madden team, you probably still wouldn't be happy with. Pittsburgh for me is definitely going to be adding a guy in the draft. But what type of a wide receiver are they going to add? Are they going to add a complementary piece? Are they going to add a guy that maybe plays in the slot a little bit more often? Are they going to add a type of field stretcher? For me, if they can get a guy that's a little bit more complete and can really hone in on the middle of the field, that's going to help George Pickens down the field, which he's been really good at lately. Last season, he had 405 receiving yards on targets that were 20 or more yards down the field, 12th among wide receivers. And on those same targets, he had 100 receiving yards after the catch, tied for 5th most in the league. The big playability is going to be there, and we know more than likely they're going to be running the football and utilizing some 2 tight end sets as well. I don't know if I trust Arthur Smith to do the right thing in Pittsburgh. We'll find out very shortly, but George Pickens, as long as they don't add a true guy that could dominate him on the outside, he should end up being the wide receiver 1 in Pittsburgh. Let's talk about a true league winner down the stretch, Zamir White. And even with a ton of running backs available in free agency, the Las Vegas Raiders decided to stay away from it and just sign Alexander Mattison. So yeah, Zamir White is still the running back 1 on this team. And while Madison could end up pushing him for some touches based on his performance last year, White is in the driver's seat as of right now. And running the football is going to have to be a priority with the Las Vegas Raiders. We know Antonio Pierce is definitely one of those hard-nosed, gritty type of coaches that is going to want to establish the run game. But when your quarterbacks are Aiden O'Connell and Gardner Minshew, you're going to have to run the football a little bit. You're not going to be able to go out there and sling it 40, 45, or 50 times a game. So that's where a lot of the question comes into play. Do the Las Vegas Raiders end up giving up a bunch of draft capital to go up and get a quarterback, which potentially could still make life easier on the running backs, but maybe they don't invest in a running back in the draft because they have other areas of need? Or do they look at adding a running back in the first 3 rounds, a true 3-down back, which there are a couple in this draft class that might be a little underwhelming right now, but under the right coaching and leadership could end up developing into good NFL running backs? And if they add those guys, do they end up being better than Zamir White? Because from weeks 15 through 18 last season, the last 4 weeks of the year, Zamir White played 96 snaps, the most of any running back in the NFL. He was on the field the entire time. And he did end up ranking 3rd among running backs with 288 yards after contact. So from a volume standpoint, just overall during those few weeks, he was really good. He helped win some leagues for some players. But when you take a look at the efficiency, things really dropped. He was outside the top 30 running backs when you take a look at yards after contact per attempt, and not just on a big level basis. So if the Las Vegas Raiders are dedicated to Zamir White, he absolutely has an opportunity to be a guy that is inside the top 24 running backs. Alexander Mattison may take a few touches from him here or there, but he's going to end up being the first guy up. But if Las Vegas does invest in that true all-around running back that could end up helping out this team, Zamir White, if he doesn't get to be a little bit more efficient, could end up being out of a job pretty quickly. And Headliner Nation, keep in mind, this is the type of video that you can use for Dynasty or Redraft. Right now, Dynasty leagues are in full swing. We've got rookie drafts coming up very soon, or we've got startups getting ready to happen as well. And because of that, some of these guys that I mentioned in this video could end up being really good bargains for you right now that end up having a lot more value later on, or they could end up hurting you right now if you don't make the right decision. But however you plan on using this video, make sure you like it, make sure you subscribe, and the most important thing that you could do is turn on the bell notifications. Why is that? Well, when our subscribers come to our videos and watch them rather quickly, it helps the YouTube algorithm and it shares our video with the entire world, which you may not love because you don't want people to know about us. But for us making a living doing this, it's actually really good for us to have more views on our video. And you can help immensely with that. But for now, Headliner Nation, I'm gonna get out of here. Appreciate you all checking out this video. Peace out, stay safe, and stay healthy. And I'll catch you all in the next episode of the Fantasy Headliners.